and sharing buttons with us or a necklace with us. So we'll see that. I have my book here today. My book is Prepare for the Economic Recession that's coming. Now she says it's 2020. I think it's going to come before then, but after all, I'm only listening to my son.
Hindsight is 2020.
Hindsight is 2020. Okay, want you to know. I have to tell you, I was absolutely amazed this week when I got a letter from Steve Shabbat. I have written to him perhaps 15 or 20 times, and he finally wrote a letter to me. Thank you very much. Recently, you contacted me to express your opposition to Trump's proposal to construct a wall. It has to be relatively recent. Anyway, okay. I still don't see Rupa here.
She's not here.
She's not here yet, but the cover of the Inquirer last week that had Rupa, one of our members here, confronting Shabbat in his one of his open offices. And here's another article that was about purge voters getting another chance to vote. And there was one this morning that I put out aside but forgot to put in my bag. You know how it is. But it was about gerrymandering, I think. And they're going to be putting together a jury pretty soon, and we'll be able to watch the jury consider gerrymandering. Yes. Wait. He has the microphone. He'll hand you the microphone. He's next.
Since you're talking about gerrymandering and the court suit.
Louder.
Okay. The League of Women Voters and the ACLU have requested that interested parties attend as many of these gerrymandering sessions as possible, but especially Wednesday, March the 6th and Thursday, March the 7th.
Tomorrow and Thursday.
And it is there's a trial at the federal courthouse downtown. It's going on every day for 10 days, and it's all about changing the gerrymandered districts for the 2020 election. Because we voted for a change in to have fair districting, but it's not going to be implemented until 2022. So the ACLU and the League of Women Voters has filed a suit saying it's urgent, it's an emergency situation, that it's so bad that the courts have to intervene for the 2020 election. And they feel very hopeful. They think they have two Democratic judges. They have one Republican judge hearing the case who's not extreme. So they're very hopeful that can happen. That would be awesome for Ohio and give us the potential to have a fair outcome for the first time in a number of years. So they're trying to get people to go down to the federal courthouse and show interest and be a presence.
That's tomorrow and Thursday.
Well, and it goes on for 10 days, but they're emphasizing tomorrow and Thursday.
Which courthouse? The federal or?
Federal.
Okay. Does everybody know where that one is? It's the one that's closer to Fountain Square, right in back of Graders. Right in back of Graders. And now we have Dick Galloway,
with the
button
button,
makers.
which was only made possible through the graces of our host today. She does such wonderful things. So she let me use her machine, and she provided the blanks, and she and I are making an order of 250 each very soon, so these are going to be around all the time. What it says is very simply, we're not asking very much. Just democracy working as it should.
Amen.
It unites and it simplifies. You know, they say keep it simple, stupid. Well, I own the stupid part. Keeping it simple is almost impossible for me. But anyhow, so that's the beginning, and I'm going to talk about this in June as the speaker. Second part of it is what I call the issues table, and there are copies of this back on the bar. And this is another one of those things where it shows that these issues unite us all by a huge majority, and that means that we are the center. We're not right or left. And that makes all the difference in healing the divide our nation feels today. And the third one is I call the mood of the nation, and what it does is zeroes in on getting the money out at 80% level polling ever since Citizens United, even more. I've seen numbers into 88 and into the 90s on this currently. So this gets to the issue of how do we begin to fix it. So I have buttons available. They are free of charge, but if you want to make a donation, that would be
Three
fine.
buttons. See Dick Galloway, please. Okay, here we go.
Hi.
Sid's mother.
Hi, everybody. Did anybody talk about Span, Ohio?
Not yet.
They're going to have a lobbying day next Wednesday. It's Wednesday the 13th. If anyone's interested, I know I've gotten emails about it, and I can forward an email to you, which gives you the contact number for getting on the list for someone to escort you to meet your representative at the Ohio State House in Columbus. And that way they set up the time for you to meet with your representative so that you don't have to worry about the logistics. You just need to show up if you want everyone in the country to have health care so that it's not unfair to the people who, for some reason, still don't have health care. Thank you.
Right. That reminds me about Peter. Peter.
Just talk to me and
Peter,
I'll
right
forward
here
the
in the
email
front.
to you, and then you contact them to get on the list for next Wednesday.
If you have announcements and you want to have something said in our newsletter about that announcement, please fill out a card for Peter and he will put it in our newsletter for the week. He's really been good about getting things and keeping us informed. A wonderful thing is our newsletter. I'm really happy with it. Go for it.
There's flyers on each table about fair tax abatement strategies for neighborhoods. This next session is going to be Thursday, March 14th. But this is important because at the end of this year, the 20-year tax abatement agreement between the city and Cincinnati Public Schools expires. So it's an opportune time to get an agreement that supports the schools instead of takes money away from them. And here, I want you to emphasize this sheet of paper. I'm going to pass some extra ones around. It's how property tax abatements hurt our schools as it's currently working at this, or not working at this time. After 20 years, we need a new direction.
Maybe more taxes going to schools. Wouldn't that be a surprise? Boy, I would have loved that. My last 5 years, I had no budget for my chemistry class. I had to supply all my chemistry equipment and chemical supplies. Anybody else? Looks like we're almost there. Are we ready? We're ready for the introduction to our special speaker today. And the introduction is going to be done by Dot Christensen, a welcome and loyal member of our program here. Here's she and Dot. Ann, hold up your hand. She and Dot are often kind of mistaken as sisters. And she's Ann and she's Dot, but people confuse them because they look so much alike and they're often together. Sisterhood is very powerful. Let's go. Okay, and with that, here's Dot Christensen introducing Don Sherman.
But I had one last announcement. Put April 3rd on your calendar. The Women's City Club is doing their national speaker at Memorial Hall at 7 o'clock. It's Helen Thorpe, who is the author of several books, but she will be talking about immigration, about the newcomers. She was a teacher of 30 Mexican immigrant students in Denver, and their experience and how they became integrated, and she's followed up on 5 years later to see how they're doing. And it should be a very interesting program, and I hope we'll put it on the calendar, and I'll give Peter information. I think it's already there, right, so we hope you'll come. It's my privilege to be able to introduce Don Sherman today. My privilege to introduce Don Sherman today. I think there's a dozen people in the room who might be able to do that, perhaps better than I can. But I've known Don for a long time. He's an immigration specialist, a lawyer, has worked with many communities, and he's been particularly working on deportation issues and helping families in that area. And he's going to give us kind of a history of immigration law, I think, just very briefly. He's a good friend of Julie, who was here last week. In fact, he's meeting with her immediately after this meeting, so he can tell us all about it. So Don, I'm very pleased to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. So I know I'm following closer. Horizontal.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
that's better.
All right. I know I'm following Julie last week when she appeared. I am not sure I'm going to be saying some of the things that she talked about. She's an immigration lawyer that I have worked with in the past and will be working with in the future. I'll give a little bit more about my background just so you know who I am and why I think it's important to know. I lived in Mexico working for the AFL-CIO from 1997 to 2000. My wife worked at NIOSH, so she was training doctors in Mexico. So in that capacity, I was able to see the effects of NAFTA. NAFTA, as you all know, is the North American Free Trade Agreement. That agreement, which was passed, really ratified in 1994, had a devastating effect on Mexican rural families, both farmers and people who worked through the farmers. We estimated, or there's been an estimate, that perhaps 3 million people were displaced from their farms or from the work they were doing because of NAFTA. So when you look at a graph in terms of people coming here from Mexico, you look from 1996-7 up through the middle of the 2000s, you see a huge spike. And in fact, my good friend Nancy Sullivan will show a graph, which you can't see in the back maybe, but in 2001, 1.6 million people, mostly Mexican, came to the United States. And we believe that NAFTA was responsible for a lot of migration. Amen. So that's...
And what is the number in 2018?
In 2018, the number was approaching 400,000. So it's basically 1/4 of the number in 2001 of 1.6 million. So the sense, and we'll talk about the wall and the emergency declaration that some president wants to enact. Right. So there's no emergency, basically. We know the emergency, and we'll talk about that as well, is really for the people in Central America. It's not the Mexicans who are coming over now. It's the Central Americans from the Northern Triangle. So I lived in Mexico. I felt really welcome in Mexico. I went to some of the areas in the Sierras, in central Mexico in the mountains. And I've working and trying to, working with some of the unions in Mexico. And I found that employers were going down to the poorest areas, the Michoacan areas of Mexico, and recruiting workers to come up to the United States. They wouldn't give them bus fare. Still? Okay. It's really strange holding them like this, but.
Much better.
Are you? Okay, so what happened in the late 1990s that I saw were employers, meatpacking plant employers, saying you get to Dubuque, Iowa, you get to Minneapolis, you have a job. I'm not giving you the money to come here, you just come to this one packing house or wherever, and you have a job. So they knew, with all these displaced workers, that there had to be a place, they're going to be working someplace, why don't you come to the United States? We had a thriving unions in the packing, in the meat packing plants, and they wanted to bust those unions. And that was one of the reasons we saw that spike. So I want to get a little bit into, and maybe I should also say that I was also the director of the Cincinnati Interfaith Workers Center from 2005 to 2012. And with that work, I saw what was happening here in the Cincinnati area. We recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars where employers, mainly people who paid under the table, didn't pay their workers. Not all were Latinos, not all were immigrants, but the great majority of people that I worked with were immigrants who were taken advantage by these employers. So I have this background, and I felt after I retired that I should continue. I have a law degree. I practiced law in California, but my expertise was labor and other areas of law, not immigration. But I'm starting to do immigration work now, and I'm going into the jails, the detention jails, the ICE detention jails. We have several in this area. One is Boone County, the other is Butler County. And what happens in Butler County, you get arrested for whatever crime, or ICE picks you up off the street or at a workplace. You're going to be sent, if you're in Cincinnati area, to Butler County. You'll be held in Butler County until either get a bond, you can get a bond, you can at least request a bond, and you can get out to defend yourself in immigration court. If not, you're basically pressured to leave. So I've been in these jails for several years now, going in to talk to the immigrants. And I'm not just talking about Latino immigrants. There's been a big upsurge in, and I talked to people in the table where I was sitting, big upsurge of West Africans being processed and held by ICE after being here for 20 years or more. And I think Julie probably talked about it. I won't talk much about it, but I will talk a little bit about the conditions in the jail. When I have been into the jail at Butler County, it's basically, I ask people, what, you're in your cell for 18 to 20 hours a day. That's solitary confinement. What kind of breakfast or lunch do you have? Well, breakfast, we have a piece of toast and water. Now that's kind of the rations that you would think is in Devil's Island or some other kind of prison, but it's here in Butler County. And they make around 150, I'm not sure what they make now, per each individual that they keep in detention for ICE. So last few months I've been going in, I've been talking to the mostly Guatemalan population inside that detention facility. The Guatemalans are, in this area, are the ones who are coming into the United States, into Ohio and into Cincinnati. They are mostly Mayan. When I talk about Mayan, people probably know the civilization. It's an ancient civilization, several thousand years of civilized society throughout Central America and southern Mexico. But they're the poorest people in Central America. They've been discriminated against for hundreds and hundreds of years. In Guatemala, there was a civil war where we really backed the government in terms of the prosecution of that war against mostly the Mayan peoples. So now we have a situation where, and I'll talk about two things. CAFTA, I just mentioned NAFTA before. CAFTA is Central American Free Trade Agreement. That includes the Dominican Republic as well. But CAFTA had an effect, like NAFTA, of displacing hundreds of thousands of farmers through the Northern Triangle. So we knew that, or the people who basically were the makers of this treaty knew this was happening. They knew this was going to happen in terms of the displacement of so many thousands of people. They thought the maquiladoras, those sweatshops, would take those extra workers who now left their farms and their areas that they lived for centuries to work in maquiladoras, but those maquiladoras have really failed. They haven't been successful. You can work, an employer can take his business, his apparel business, to Vietnam and pay 54 cents an hour or a day. So it was much easier for these immigrants, or for these employers, to move out of Central America. In fact, after CAFTA was passed, there's less of these maquiladoras, these apparel shops, than before CAFTA was initiated. That was initiated in, CAFTA was initiated in 2006. So it really created a real problem for the poor, the rural poor in Central America. We're dealing with mostly with mostly Mayans who come up here, and they speak, many of the people I work with speak in dialects, Mayan dialects. There's like 22 or 23, and they come from maybe 5 or 6 villages to Cincinnati because they have a sister or a friend who lives here, and it might be a place they could come and feel that they can be safe in some way, and they can basically try to earn money to send back to their families. And I've gone in, as I said, working with some of these Guatemalans, and I asked them, because you have to have a defense. You can't just be here in the United States, crossing the frontera, the border, without an asylum defense or some other kind of defense, the reason you're here. So I asked some of the people that I've worked with, well, why are you here? Trying to elicit some sort of way that we can help them legally. And almost to the person that I've talked to, they talk about, well, my kids are starving. Or, you know, I had to pay a bank note. I couldn't afford a bank note. These were all farmers. So they come here basically out of desperation. We hear about the caravans and the sense that people are coming up here in large numbers. Well, they're coming up here because I don't think I have. You hold it, Nancy can talk about it too. It's basically families who are coming here now. In the 90s and 2000s, a lot of single women. But you see right here, the numbers of families have just increased enormously 2018, that's the gray area. I don't know if people can see it, but
Here, why don't I walk it around? And just to say, here's 2012, 90% were single men. So following what Don was talking about with CAFTA and NAFTA, driving people off their land. Now, their families are starving. So from 90% single men, we now have we have 50% women and children. And then the brown at the top are the so-called unaccompanied minors. I got a call today about one who's on the border, mother's here.
Why don't you just walk around with the
Yeah.
road?
okay, I want to at least talk a little bit about immigration law and who's here now. Under our Constitution, Congress sets who can be naturalized in this country. So when it first set this policy in 1790, it was a policy after the Constitution was ratified. Congress, in its wisdom, said free white men who've been here 2 years. That's enough, you can be naturalized as a U.S. citizen. It wasn't until 1870 that African Americans were recognized to be citizens of this country. So we've had a long history of discrimination in terms of who could be a citizen. We had the Chinese, the first immigration law that basically excluded people, besides the slaves who were never a citizen, was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And the reason that was passed was the Chinese in the West who were coming in were much more, they worked on the railroads and they were able to succeed. That really disturbed the white majority in California and other areas of the West. So this Exclusion Act was passed, and basically after the Exclusion Act was passed, there was a recruitment of Mexican workers to work on the railroad. So we've had a long history of using labor from Mexico.
Using and abusing.
Huh?
And abusing. And abusing. Using and abusing.
As Nancy said, I don't know if people heard, using and abusing. So, up until 1920s, we really didn't have INS, or Immigration Naturalization Service, which is kind of morphed into our Department of Homeland Security and ICE. We weren't excluding necessarily people from coming into the United States until 1924, when we decided, well, we can't have this huge immigration population. In that time period, or even before, around 15% of all people in the United States were foreign born. Now it's around 14%, right? So it is not much different. In the 50s, it went way down, and it's gone back up until now it's about 14%, where it once was 15% in the early 1900s. I don't know if people can trace back their ancestry to Italy or Greece or Eastern European. I grew up in Northern Ohio, which seemed like in my town, everybody was from Eastern Europe. They were all factory workers. They were all, people spoke different languages when you went into somebody's house. My family came from West Virginia and Southern Ohio, so we're the hillbillies of that area. But so it wasn't really strange for me, in a situation where there was a large, diverse population of people from other areas of the world besides being born in the United States. But in 1924, the United States government passed a law basically excluding people on a national quota system. Right? That national quota system, though, didn't base it on any recent census. They went back to 1890. And before 1890, who was here? Mostly German and some of the Irish people, but English, Irish, and German were here. So they based that national quota on that. So the Italians, no, you can't come in now because we have enough Italians. That changed in 1965. Did Julie talk about this? I hope I'm not taking away from what she said. 1965, in the administration of Johnson, the law was passed. Basically, it was family-based and skill-based. So if you came here as a worker, you had a visa, or you had another reason to be here legally, you can bring your mother over. Right? That was part of why they did it. You could bring your family over, because we wanted to be family-based. One of the things that really strikes me from working with so many immigrants through the years, especially the people from Mexico that I've worked with for the last 10 years, they cannot go back to see their families. They're undocumented. They might have a mixed family here. That means they might have 2 children born here, 1 child not brought in when they were very young. But they cannot see their families in Mexico, which really creates this situation of tension and feelings of when people and their families die or are really sick. They have no way to go back. We have not addressed this problem with law-abiding, in a sense, because they came here undocumented, with so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of immigrants who've been here 10 to more years. We have a huge population. We have children born here whose mothers and fathers are undocumented. They have to worry all the time about being deported or having something happen to them. So I hope, I know this is a Democratic crowd, I hope we can really push our Congress people. I know Shabbat wrote a letter, so maybe he's in favor of what you want to bring to his attention. But I think it's really important that we think about the people that have been here, that have basically paid taxes, done everything right for so many years, that really should stay here. But going on a little bit about immigration laws so I can at least get you up to date. So 65 families, skilled positions. In 1986, we know that the Reagan administration had passed what is now commonly referred to as amnesty, right? But it was also a punishment for employers and sanctions on employers who hired immigrants who didn't have documents. That was not really discussed much, and it really didn't have much of an effect in this country. Just because you have a law that says we can sanction employers who hire immigrants who don't have documents doesn't mean they do it, right? I was involved in the cooked food raids. The people remember Cooked Foods, 2007, right? So what happened in Cooked Foods, a number of us who were part of a group of people who have been involved in the immigrant community in one way or another were called by ICE to a meeting at Sukasa, which was Catholic Charities. We didn't know what the meeting was about. We got there, and as they talked, we started hearing phone calls from people in the community who told us there was a big raid happening, right? ICE wanted to tell us about it after the fact, but the raid happened where several hundred workers were detained by ICE at the Cook Foods packing place in Westchester, or Fairfield. And what happened was the first and third shifts were detained. The second shift, we had supervisors calling, come in, they're not going to bother us. Please come in. So the 200, it's actually 166 people who were detained were put in deportation proceedings. Their families were in a situation where they had to pay the rent, and we really tried to scramble to make sure that, you know, people were at least safe, or trying to help them with some of the problems that occurred. Cook Foods, which, you know, my opinion, I don't want anybody to call Cook Foods, knew about the raid before. They cooperated. They did get a fine, $10,000, I think was the fine. For that kind of operation, it was a nickel for them. They had 160 workers who were detained. Almost all of them were eventually deported. And out of those workers, not coincidentally, but just to give you a sense of, mostly from Mexico, but we had 60 people from Peru who were here on a tourist visa. And, you know, when you look at the statistics, we're talking about, oh, we need a wall. Well, 60 people from Peru were working at Cook Foods with a tourist visa. Many, I talked to a few, one was a CPA, teachers. They didn't make enough in Peru at that time, in 2007, to really afford with their families what they needed. So they came here, stayed with a sister, got a job at Cook Foods, 60 of them. So it gives you an example that, you know, this sense that, oh, if we get a wall, we're going to stop people from coming. Many, if not the majority of people, overstay their visas, students or otherwise, work visas, or they come here with a tourist visa and just stay past 6 months. And many, when you try to get a visa to the United States, you have to show they have income, that you're going back. But many still stay to work here because they can get paid better than they can in Peru or Mexico or wherever they get their visa. So,
On a student visa or a work visa, well, not a work visa, obviously, but on a, oh, thank you. On a visitation visa or a student visa, are you allowed to work?
There's some real limitations. You're talking about student visa. There's real limitations on what you can do in terms of work. A tourist visa, you can't work. You're basically here as a tourist to see the museums or whatever you want to do as a tourist, but no. Basically, you're on a visa, student or tourist. You can limited work for students within the school system or the university system, not outside.
One more comment. My father came to the United States in 1932. He jumped ship, all right? At the outset of World War II, he got nervous about being deported, so he left for Canada and came in legally. Is this a problem that is age-old? This isn't a recent problem.
No, it's not. Yeah, I understand. It's not a recent problem at all. And I'm not sure if it is a real problem, you know, in terms of how we can reintegrate or try to work with the immigrants here. But you're right. I mean, people, I was in the Army, the U.S. Army, in Vietnam, I had Canadians who wanted to be citizens who were in the Army with me. And they thought the best way to be a citizen if you join the Army and see the world or see Vietnam. I don't know how much. So, yeah, this is an age-old situation. But now I think the focus so much on this, with this administration, is really racist in some way. They're focusing on the southern border, right? That's what we want to build a wall on the southern border. There are drugs coming in from the northern border. These are design drugs, fentanyl. There's drugs coming into our ports of entry, airplanes. But the way the Trump administration characterizes it, and he mentioned that on the campaign trail, these are rapists and criminals, so we have to build a wall. And who I've seen, working with the immigrant community, is an incredible community working as hard as they can in jobs that even as a young kid I wouldn't want to do. But they're doing the work. We, in our agricultural sector, for example, there's probably 1 million or so workers, right, working around the country. At least half are undocumented. This administration is not going to be attacking that industry and getting rid of half the workers. And the other half are basically from the Bracero program. Remember, people know what the Bracero program is?
No.
Well, it started in 44, 45 because so many workers, agricultural and other workers, were in the U.S. Armed Forces. So the thought was, well, we need to have workers, especially in agriculture, come in to work our agricultural industry and to replace those American or U.S. born workers who were in the armed services. That continued till 1965. The war was over in 45. But it basically broke the union, the idea of really having good wages for workers in the agriculture industry. Our agriculture industry really pressed this to continue the program, so they continue to bring in guest workers to work in the agricultural sector of the United States. So it really shows the power, we talked about cooked foods, but the power of corporate America in determining different things about immigration. We're not going after those workers who are picking, the fruits and vegetables that we all enjoy. I don't know, do we have questions?
You want to finish, Don? Do you have something to finish first?
Well, I've got so much, and it's already.
What's the current legislation? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? So we're talking about, we hear about almost daily the invasion from the border, as you put it. And it was my understanding that, and I know that these people coming over are running away from, repressive regimes, crime, violence, etc. And it's my understanding they have to go through an asylum process. Now, my question is, can you review or explain briefly how this process works, and where do the asylum seekers, what happens to them during the vetting process? I'm sure it takes quite a bit of time.
Well, not everybody, well, as I indicated, most people are coming from Central America. So, and in fact, some bring their children. So not everybody comes through the port of entry, which many are doing now, indicating that they want asylum. but they are given or paroled into the United States until a court, immigration court, makes some determinations about their situation in terms of being deported. So we have a lot of people here that have come in with a child and either have been detained later on and deported, or that they are in the process of immigration court, right? So, but there are people that ask for asylum. They come in, they ask for asylum. They're given a interview at the border to make some determinations if their asylum claim has any validity. They're allowed to come into the United States to then apply for asylum, right? So you have to do it within 1 year of being in the United States. I'm working with several people who are applying for asylum. Problem is that, well, first there's a number of problems. The Department of Justice is, I gotta hold this up. The Department of Justice appoints the immigration judges, right?
They're not under the judiciary.
Yeah, they're not, they don't go through a Senate confirmation process. They're being hired or employed by the Department of Justice. Jeff Sessions was the Attorney General who said last year, as he also indicated that we should divide children from their families, that gang violence and domestic violence has nothing to do with asylum. So we can take it out of immigration court, but you have to go through immigration court. If they deny, you say, well, I was raped, gang violence, and they were going to kill me and my child. I came here to protect myself. Well, the immigration court might say, well, Jeff Sessions said this is not a valid reason for you to seek asylum. We can take it out of the immigration court as two courts, the BIA, the appeals court, but that takes time and money, and there's hardly any lawyers here who are doing pro bono. So, to ask your questions, yeah, there is a certain percentage who are coming here looking for asylum. Others, as I suggested, think their asylum claim is because their kids are starving, right? They're going to be deported at some point. They have what's called these GPS devices on their ankles, so they are followed by ICE. ICE knows where they are. But eventually they'll be deported if they don't have a defense.
But they're effectively shutting down the asylum process, is that what you're saying?
Well, they're curtailing it. Right.
You're next, man.
John, you gave a great history of all of this problem. What is our plan of action as citizens? Where do we agitate? Who do we write? What do we do? What will help?
Yay!
What will help?
Nancy, you clapped harder than anybody, so. Nancy Sullivan, I don't know if people know Nancy. I've been working with Nancy for a number of years. She works with the immigrant community in Price Hill and other areas. I know she just came back from, we take people up to, when you were talking about asylum, or, yeah. So, one of the things I think is really important, and I talked about this just a little bit, we need to have our Congress, and this is difficult, really pass a law that recognizes the contributions of immigrants in this country. So I think it's going to take more than just writing letters, but I think that's important. We have two Congress people in this area that we've tried to work with and trying for them to understand the issues. They really haven't, but we need We need a law that protects the immigrants who are law-abiding. Whether it's called amnesty again, we need to do that. We also need, I think, kind of a Marshall Plan for Central America. Because, you know, we had a Marshall Plan after World War II, right? People aren't coming up here, they don't want to leave their country. People, the Mayans that I work with, they've been here, they can trace their ancestry back thousands of years in this one area, right? So they don't want to leave their country. They're forced to. And what we've done in terms of supporting the wars in Central America in the 80s, in terms of CAFTA that we talked about, there is, I've been reading about climate change and drought, whether that's climate change. Drought has really affected many of these small farmers as well. We've been giving money to the governments. The governments are not really doing much for their people, right? In Honduras, 2009, we supported a coup.
Hillary did lie.
Oh, yeah.
So we supported a coup, and that coup, which was military-based, they have a president, has really repressed particularly the poor people. Honduras, 16% of Hondurans make $2 a day or less.
Talk about the activist woman that was
Okay.
killed right after that coup.
I just want to add one thing because Bernadine was asking what people can do. Those are national things. I can tell you that driving people from Price Hill to Blue Ash to check in with ICE is really important. We need people who can actually be there helping people as individuals. What, like this? Talk about unidirectional. Okay, we need drivers. It doesn't matter whether or not you speak Spanish. All these people, these families, have to check in at least monthly. If they have a problem with their GPS, it's more often. And there are too few drivers taking people from Price Hill, from Carthage, from Springdale up there. Another thing, who is a locally elected Democrat, sorry, maybe this is the wrong group to be saying this to, who is doing really unjust things, and that is the sheriff. If you are arrested, that does not mean you're guilty, right? You haven't been to court. Even before you are arraigned, you will be reported to ICE. So if you go to court and are found innocent, you still will end up in Butler County on your way to being deported. If you're lucky enough to get a bond, I don't know how many of you could raise $20,000 in less than a week to pay, but that's what is usually necessary. So we need to be saying to the sheriff, there's an agreement, you are not following it, it is unjust, and we are not going to stand for it as Hamilton County Democrats. But if you've got, if you are available every Monday morning to take people, maybe some Monday mornings there's no one. Yesterday I took 2 people up to BI. And one of them had just moved. She never lived in a place where there's mail, right? So it never occurred to her to do a change of address. She missed a court date in Cleveland. She walked into BI, which is a contractor for ICE, and is a subsidiary of the GEO Group, which is one of the 2 largest private prison companies. Talking about vertical integration here. And she was told she had 30 days before she'd be deported because she didn't do a change of address and didn't show up for literally a 5-minute hearing in Cleveland. So basic things, helping somebody fill out in a change of address, driving people, and then you get a chance to see what it's like when you walk in to either the ICE office or the BI office and there are a dozen people there. By the way, in the ICE office, there's no bathroom, and you might be there for 3 hours with a small child.
We're
where can people sign up for volunteering?
I'll have a paper in the back.
How about picketing with me and others? There were 30 to 40 of us there yesterday.
Uh-huh.
at
Thank you,
Rob
Tommy.
Portman's office. It was bitterly cold, but where were you? Come on down and join us.
I was at the BI office.
Don,
Oh,
thank you so much for what you're doing. It's incredible. Thank you for your service to Vietnam and your service now. I don't understand how NAFTA and CAFTA drove people off their land.
well, our multinational agricultural industry,
Conagra.
Conagra, whatever, others really pushed for NAFTA. And the reason they pushed for NAFTA, they could undersell Mexican farmers. We're talking about NAFTA, especially with corn. That's really corn is historically central in Mexico in terms of its origins. So they undersold Mexican small farm farmers, so they really couldn't compete. And we have a subsidized industry, right?
Yep.
Mexico, through NAFTA, was told, you can't subsidize your farmers. You can't help them with seeds. You can't help them with anything. They have to compete. But are they really competing with multinational agricultural industry in the United States, which is subsidized? That's what happened with NAFTA. That's what happened with CAFTA. CAFTA is basically the grain agricultural industry is pushing grain sales in Central America, which is causing many of the farmers to lose their land or not be able to pay, as I mentioned earlier, the banks that they owe money to.
Hello. Yeah, it seemed to me that the part of the real message of your history is just how consistently getting rid of unions has been the key policy. This is clear in the movie Dark Money. I was so delighted when Elizabeth Warren announced her campaign from Lawrence and brought some of that history home. She said, they're going to accuse me of class warfare. She said, the ruling class has been doing class warfare for hundreds of years. Exactly. And this message just doesn't get to politicians.
Yeah, one of the things that we've always tried to work with as I was the director of the Cincinnati Interfaith Worker Center is the connection between workers. I worked in Mexico with Mexican unions. We have to see the connection, and we have to understand that many of us, it's basically the sense that if I can pay you a lot less and you're not a union, then that's great. That's what I want to do. What we saw at Smithfield, I don't know if people know Smithfield. When I was a union negotiator years ago, Smithfield would call ICE to those organizers, Latino, Hispanic organizers. They would call them and say, this person is non-documented, you have to take them out. ICE, because it is part of our government, they decided, yeah, well, Smithfield called us, or another large agricultural industry called us, we're going to take those organizers out. They'll leave the rest of the workers there.
And they treat their pigs terrible.
And they treat their pigs terrible.
Terrible.
And chickens terrible, because
Last question.
Yeah, we've been talking about this issue of immigration, and I know that when we lived in Germany, if you were non-EU, non-status of forces, if you were there on a tourist visa, you had to report to the police every so often, and if you didn't, they'd come looking for you. Here it appears that we just let people in on tourist visas, and it's like, okay, if we ever catch you, great, and if we don't, that's, you're good luck. We've been talking about immigration reform. I have no idea what it is this is supposed to actually be. is this just some sort of open wound that we're supposed to just pick on and exhibit? Or are we actually gonna, come up with a rational system of saying people can visit here, people can work here and go back, people can come here, and become permanent residents and citizens? Why do we not do anything? Who benefits from this crappy system?
Guess who?
Yeah, I don't know, I think everyone here, I'm really impressed with the people in terms of their reactions. I didn't know how you going to react, because I speak in front of audiences that are in favor of really radical, not radical, what you said, practical solutions. We need a practical solution, and not the sense that we should blame the immigrants for everything. We need something to basically say we can have so many people here coming into the United States. I think what we have now, 14%, as I indicated, who are non-US born, that's kind of norm back in the early 1900s. And as you see, the immigrants, if you know, are really contributing to our society. So we need how do we get to that?
And they're paying taxes and they get no benefit, they'll never get the
They'll never get,
Security.
the one thing that I really find offensive is that, $77 billion are from immigrants have been put into, for me and others who are 65 and over, into Social Security. They'll never get that. I work with people who are been here 20 years, who work in hard jobs. They're not going to retire. They don't have Social Security, but they put in 20 years of Social Security for some of us. So I think it's really important to really understand that, and to come up, and somebody I mentioned the nonpartisanship that we could work on. People should understand it's a benefit for this country to have immigrants. How do we go about really codifying that in some way that makes some sense, as you suggested in Germany?
The people that benefit are.
But I just, I don't need the microphone, but a quick announcement. On the 12th, a week from now, there is at the Hilton Netherlands, We Build the Wall is coming. Chris Kovac is coming, Steve Bannon. It's on Facebook. I couldn't find it anywhere else. So there are tickets available, but also I feel like we should have a picket line and some leafleting, because these are misinformed people.
And
Let's march on the stage, stop the thing.
Why don't we buy all the
March on the stage and stop the whole thing.
It's a week from now at 6 o'clock, I think. It's on Facebook. Anyway.
Okay, I'm going to hold it here. Now, if Don Sherman is not smart enough to run right out, you can ask him, he can stay for a moment and just answer your questions. But I want to thank you for being a great audience, and thank you, Don Sherman, for a great presentation today. Thank you. Don't get a man.